The Tippit shooting is a long and complex explanation because the official story is so wrong. I'm going to start with the official story's time of death. I'm going to say it's 1:17. You could quibble. The official story basically is any time between 1:15 and 1:18, I guess. But I'm going to call it 1:17 for convenience sake. The official story is that J.D. Tippit was shot on 10th Street in Oak Cliff at 1:17 p.m. on November 22nd, 1963. But there is much evidence for an earlier shooting time, which I'm going to call 1:09. And I don't want to go into it too deeply, but Temple Bowley, a witness who arrived at the scene after the shooting, said he looked at his watch and it was 1:10 p.m. That's what his watch said. So, and it couldn't have been more than a minute since he, because of the way things unfolded, that is, it's so many inputs, it's hard to explain. But I'll just do it this way simply. Temple Bowley says 1:10 p.m. That's when he got there, so it would be before 1:10 p.m. that Tippit had been shot. Helen Markham puts a time of 1:06 p.m. on it, and Tippit was pronounced dead at Methodist Hospital at 1:15 p.m., and that I give a time for the shooting at 1:09. And of course 1:09 is not 1:17, it's 8 minutes earlier than the official time of the shooting. And some people will argue that it's earlier than 1:09, that 1:06 is correct. And if this were the only information available, then I might agree with them. But anyway, I assigned this a time, somewhat arbitrarily perhaps, of 1:09. I guess I should go into some detail here. This is Helen Markham, her affidavit on November 22nd. And she's got it at approximately 1:06 p.m. And she had just made a phone call and looked at a clock before she walked out of a building and went to stand on the corner there. So this is probably the best evidence for Helen Markham's time, because this is what she said on the day that it happened, that at approximately 1:06 p.m. And she also was consistent at the Warren Commission. She also was saying 6 or 7 minutes after 1. So she early and often said 1:06 p.m. that Tippit was shot. And this is from the T.F. Bowley affidavit, which wasn't taken until December 2nd. But what he says is consistent with what Helen Markham says. He did not witness the shooting. He did not hear the shot, but he was driving by, and when he was driving by, he saw the police officer on the street. He looked at his watch, and it said 1:10 p.m. And this is really oddly good evidence. Very seldom in this case do we have somebody say that he looked at his watch and he saw the time. So this is, you would think that this is a very hard time. You know, watches aren't necessarily accurate, but he looked at his watch and it was 1:10 p.m. Rarely do you get such good evidence for a time. And we don't have a death certificate, which I think is very odd. At least I've never seen it. And I've seen people refer to this as a death certificate, and it's the only, well, there's another document or so, but this is the most doctorly official document we have giving the time of death. And the time given is 1:15 p.m. And this is meant to be the time that the doctor at Methodist Hospital said that he was dead. It's not meant to be the time that he was shot. It's not meant to be the time that he arrived at the hospital. This is the time that the doctor declared him to be dead, and it's given as 1:15. So if you take into account the time at which he was pronounced dead, 1:09 seems to be cutting it very close, because you get the ride to the hospital, which is probably 3 or 4 minutes, and then he has to be brought in, and then they have to realize they can't do anything for him, and then I think there's an official event where a doctor actually declares him dead. maybe 109 should be pushed back a little, but this will be consistent with a 106 time, or anyway, it would be consistent with an early time. That is, if Tippit was really pronounced dead at 1:15, then it has to be an earlier time. It has to be earlier than the official story time, which is at 1:17 that he was shot, so he couldn't have been pronounced dead before he was shot, could he? And even if he was shot at 1:15, he couldn't have been pronounced dead at 1:15. So the time of death, as stated by the doctors, precludes, it would seem, the official story time. But the official story time is based on what seems to be very solid evidence. We have the recording of the police radio traffic. That call comes in at 1:18, in the 1:18 minute. The call from the radio that is on the scene, Benavides and or T.F. Boley, got on Tippit's police radio and called in the event, the shooting, at 1:18. There was a telephone call from a witness at 1:19 reporting the shooting, and the ambulance service says they got the call at 1:18. So this supports the official time, and it's very strong evidence. This is hard copy sort of evidence, in a sense. Of course, documents and recordings can be altered, but this evidence is a stronger sort of evidence than a witness looking at a clock or remembering a particular time. And I'll just show this a little bit. This is the one of the transcripts of the police radio, and based on the time announcements, you can see that Benavides was on the radio, the police radio, at about 1:18. And people will argue that he said he waited a few minutes before he went to the radio, but that's not consistent with the time it took for the ambulance to get there. He couldn't have waited more than a minute to use the radio. And so the shooting had to have happened about 1:17. And while we don't have the original time slip from the ambulance service, we have an interview with Clayton Butler done, I think that was probably 1964, where he says the time slip was stamped at 1:18. And we also have telephone reports that it's hard to explain. They're referred to in the radio recording, and when you get a different address, but what they got was the address of the person calling, not the address of the shooting. So it seems to me that there's just too much of this reporting evidence occurring around 1:18 for the time to have been 1:09 or 1:06. I think this is stronger evidence than the witness evidence we have indicating the earlier time. So I think the stronger evidence supports the official story that the time of the shooting was 1:17. But the trouble, again, for the official story is that autopsy slip. This is not some witness thinking it was a particular time. This is the time that Tippit was pronounced dead, and it clearly says 1:15. Now, we have excuses made by Dale Myers, supposedly interviewing one of the doctors, supposedly, 19, 20 years after the event, where that doctor said the clocks in the hospital were screwy, and, that it really wasn't 1:15. We have other documents where the 1:15 time has been changed to 1:25, but it's obvious from the documents that the original time was not 1:25, and so the time is being altered after the fact. The strongest evidence we have on the time of death is 1:15, and it apparently originates in this autopsy permit, a document apparently written by Dr. Earl Rose. So the evidence leaves us in a quandary here. It's too contradictory, I think, to reach a decision on what the time of the shooting was based upon this evidence that I've gone over. I would have to say, if I had to choose one or the other, I would choose the later shooting time, the 1:17, And I would say that probably that for somehow the time of death is recorded incorrectly. So in my view, although the evidence is contradictory, the evidence is nearly incontrovertible that the shooting on 10th Street occurred at 1:17 p.m. or within a minute or two of that. And these contradictions are not easy to explain, but I think they can be explained. I don't think they're simply mistakes. I think we have an explanation for all of this evidence, but it's a bit complex. And the conclusion that I have come to is that all of the hard evidence is correct. That is, that Tippit, or I should say that the shooting on 10th Street did occur at 1:17, and that Tippit was pronounced dead at Methodist Hospital at 1:15. And the explanation is a long, involved thing, and this is part one here, which I guess I'll treat as an introductory video, and I'm coming near. I don't want to start something now with only 4 minutes left or whatever it is. So I'll end this video here. I say that the shots on 10th Street did occur at 1:17, and that Tippit was declared dead at 1:15. That is, he was declared dead before the shots were fired on 10th Street. And that is not impossible if he was not shot on 10th Street. If Tippit was shot somewhere else and was brought to Methodist Hospital by a different ambulance than the one that went to 10th Street, then it is possible that the shots occurred after he was declared dead, because the shots on 10th Street weren't the shots into Tippit. That's what I got to explain.